Good morning. And thank you, Diane, for that introduction. Thank all of you for being here. It is a pleasure to be with you. I love spending time with and speaking at events with pro-lifers because I know that there are so many other things that you could be doing this weekend. A lot of things back home that you would rather be maybe not rather be working on, but you know should be done. Maybe spending time with your family, or maybe just doing something that's a little more fun than talking about some of the issues that we are addressing. But I am just so pleased that you are here because we are with people that are spending time, giving of their time and talents to help people who they will never meet. And I just always find that to be so encouraging and so uplifting. In some ways, your heart has been touched by the plight of the innocent. You have heard the call of the helpless, and I thank you for listening to your heart and answering that call. My first introduction to Lutherans for Life was many years ago. At the National Right to Life Convention, we frequently had Dr. Jean Garten as one of our speakers. And I will never forget one story that she told. She was going into some event, and I don't know if she was speaking or if it was just a meeting, but there were some pro-abortion protesters outside. And one woman had a sign that said, "My choice, my body." And she was holding it, and they were all chanting, "My choice, my body." Jean said that she looked at the woman and said, "You had a choice, and you chose that body?" A sense of humor is, I think, critical. It's a great thing. Even though we are surrounded by the idea of death, the killing of unborn children, and euthanizing disabled and elderly citizens, we can still laugh. We can still have that internal joy because we do know how everything ends. We do know that in the end, God wins. I would also like to introduce to you my husband, Damon. He's the reason I'm in New Mexico. He wanted to move back to his home state, and I love it there. But Damon is just such a strong supporter and encourager. He's my best friend. He's the love of my life. I do a lot of traveling back and forth to Washington, D.C., as well as other places around the country, and he's always willing to take me to the airport. And one friend said, as long as he picks you up, you know that's still a good thing. This convention has a great theme, equipping the saints for life. The workshops are all geared toward different aspects of protecting innocent human life. If there is one thing that I could equip you with, as I could equip the saints with, the pro-lifers working in this movement, it would be courage. Deuteronomy 31. Then Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I am now 120 years old, and I am no longer able to lead you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their forefathers to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Now, I love this portion when we're talking to youth, and I'm so glad that you've got a youth track this weekend, because we need to be training the Joshuas to be at our right hand so that when we are older and no longer able to lead or do what we can, that we've got the young people there ready to take up and keep on going with this charge. But I also love this verse because as we hear again just recently, just later in Joshua, not just that Moses is saying God said this, God speaks directly to Joshua, and he says, be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. If you've been an active pro-lifer for a while, you know that some of our opponents can be downright mean and ugly. They don't care about the fact that an innocent baby is being killed. So why would they care if they hurt someone's feelings? They march, they shout, and they lie. They're in your face, and they're bullies, and they try to win by intimidation. As we come closer to that day of overturning Roe v. Wade and protecting unborn children, the battle is going to be fierce. If you think people are rude and militant now, you ain't seen nothing yet. Pro-lifers, on the other hand, respect life. We even respect the lives of those we disagree with. We're nice and polite and sometimes timid. We know that the fruit of the Spirit is love, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And we take heart from the admonition of Colossians 3. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. We don't want to offend others. We don't want to cause arguments or fights. We don't want to upset our friends or our family or our neighbors. But we have the truth. We have the facts. We need to have the courage to stand up for those whose lives are being threatened. I know pro-lifers who are so kind and compassionate and gentle and patient, but they are afraid to speak up because they don't want to offend anyone. They don't like controversy, and quite frankly, they are almost ineffective. Unfortunately, I also know some pro-lifers who are bold and courageous and brash and unyielding and so sure that they know what is right that it's very close, I think maybe even hits that point of arrogance. That also can be very ineffective. I believe we can be and need to be both Joshua and Colossians. We need to follow Joshua and Colossians. We should clothe ourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, but we also must be strong and courageous. Those are not two opposing or contrary directives. In 2 Corinthians, Paul tells us that he was both, depending on the circumstances and who he was with. By the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I appeal to you. I, Paul, who am timid when face to face with you, but bold when away. I beg that when I come, I may not have to be as bold as I expect to be towards some people who think that we live by the standards of this world. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. The dictionary says that courage is the quality of mind or spirit that enables a person to face difficulty, danger, pain, etc. without fear. If God says that he will be with us wherever we go, what do we have to be afraid of? In a practical matter, in a human matter, we fear less when we know more. Paul said that we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. I do quite a few media interviews, and I get nervous every time I have to do one because I never know what kind of questions are going to be asked, and I don't want to sound stupid or just not have the information. So I will spend a lot of time studying the topic that is supposed to be coming up in this interview. And then after it's over, I'll think, I knew so much and they asked so little. And I'm almost frustrated with myself that I spent that much time. But I think my fear was unfounded. And I think the more we know, the more courageous we can be. So I would encourage you, there's so much information available on the internet. Now, quite frankly, not all of it is true, so you have to be careful. But there is so much out there. I really would make sure that you are learning more and more about these issues so that we can talk about them and confront those who would maybe disagree or have wrong information. Now, as Christians, we live in two kingdoms. I want to talk about the left-handed kingdom that the church is facing in America. A couple of months ago, I was invited to be on the Diane Rehm show on NPR, National Public Radio. And that morning when I got up, I was nervous, so I got on my Facebook page and I just put a little note. I said, I'm going to be on the Diane Rehm show this morning. I'd appreciate it if you would pray. And immediately several friends responded that, oh yes, they will be praying. Well, I got on there and I was up against Nancy Keenan, who is the president of the National Abortion Rights Action League, NARAL, and then Karen Tumulty, a reporter from the Washington Post, was also there. And we got into this, and I was really worried because, you know, I've heard people say that when it's set up like that, it's usually 3-to-1 when it's something like a pro-life issue. And after we got into it a little bit and she took the first break, I thought, wow, this is going better than I expected. Prayer actually works. You know, I don't know why I was so surprised, but things just, you know, flowed and I think went very well. But at one point, the reporter from the Washington Post commented that when we're talking about the abortion issue, if the debate is focused on the woman, the pro-choice side wins. If the debate is focused on the baby, then our side wins. She didn't say our side, you know, the pro-lifers, the anti-abortionists win. And I thought, I've heard that for so many years, and I know it's not true. So when an opportunity came during the course of the show, I just said, you know, I reject that, and I would love the opportunity to talk about this, but, you know, focused on the woman. And I went on to talk about the women who are hurting from their abortions. And I said, we've got women I know who drive by a school ground, and they think my child would be 6 years old, and he would be out there, you know, playing on the swings with the other kids. Women who are saying, you know, I will never see my daughter go to her first prom because they killed that child. And later in the show, I challenged them, and I said, if you don't believe that women regret their abortion, then give them your phone number or your email address and encourage them to give you a call. You'll be surprised how many of the listeners on this show would be able to respond. And they didn't take me up on that offer. There was no phone number or email address given. But that got me to thinking about what is going on in this country right now, and what we are seeing as the biggest charge against us is that we are waging a war on women. And you've all heard that, right? It's been in the news how we are waging the war on women. If you think that unborn children should be welcomed in life and protected in law, you are waging a war on women. For years we have heard that pro-lifers only care about the baby. And it is supposedly those who advocate for abortion rights who are the real champions for women. But let's look at what's really happening in this country and consider who really cares about women. Abortion is the least regulated invasive procedure in the country. Many states do not require that women be fully informed about the procedure, its potential risks, or alternatives that are available, something that is required for every other medical procedure in this country. And if you've been to a doctor and had any kind of surgery, you know what I'm talking about. They will tell you what other alternatives are available. They will tell you, well, side effects from this could be. They don't have to do any of that in most states for abortion. Now, a hallmark piece of legislation for the pro-life movement would require the abortionists to provide women who are considering an abortion the opportunity to see their unborn child through ultrasound. Now, ideally, that legislation would say that the abortionist has to focus the screen, the monitor, so that the woman can see that baby. And it doesn't mean that she's going to change her mind, but quite frankly, I think it would. In many cases, we know that it has. Now, this last March, the Virginia State Assembly was considering a law that would require the abortionist to do an ultrasound before the abortion. And the outcry from abortion supporters and from the media was very loud and very intense. Their battle cry was that women should not have to undergo this horrible, degrading procedure. Now, they were talking about the ultrasound, not the abortion. They even went so far as to compare the ultrasound to rape. Now, never mind that 24 states already have some type of legislation that requires an ultrasound, or at least telling the woman that the ultrasound is available if she wants one. And never mind that almost all abortion providers already do an ultrasound, and that is included in the price of the abortion that they are charging for. In fact, more than 10 years ago, the National Abortion Federation did a survey of abortion providers in this country. 83% of them said that they always do an ultrasound before they do an abortion. Another 16% said that they will do the ultrasound in certain circumstances. Now, they aren't doing this for the mother. They are doing this for themselves, for their own medical liability, because they need to know how big is that baby. Where is the baby located in the uterus? Where is the head? And they need to know if the baby has attached itself to the somewhere in the fallopian tube and isn't even in the uterus when they try to do the abortion. So in most cases, the ultrasound is already performed. So we're saying let the woman see a picture of her unborn child. She is about to make an irreversible life or death decision. Abortion is legal, but we need to make sure that she can get all the information that is available before she goes through with that procedure. Now, for many mothers, a picture of their unborn child taken through ultrasound is commonly referred to as baby's first picture. And if you are grandparents, you've probably seen pictures of your grandchildren through the ultrasound. I know some that even have the picture up on their refrigerator. You know, mothers are posting pictures of their ultrasound baby on Facebook pages. You know, this is something very common. So people are seeing the ultrasound baby. So why not let a woman see it before she gets the abortion? Abortion advocates want to rush her through that abortion procedure before she can change her mind. They're afraid that if she sees that baby, she will choose life. Now, I'm sorry, but that is not being pro-woman. Abortion advocates, those who supposedly care about women, will even fight legislation requiring abortion facilities to meet basic health and medical standards. The most, even safety standards, those that are required by other, like outpatient facilities and hospitals. Some of the requirements are simple enough as saying that the hallways have to be wide enough that a gurney can get through if an ambulance has to be called, or that oxygen has to be available in case something happens during this abortion procedure. Our opponents will even fight that because they want no legislation, no laws restricting abortion in any way. Planned Parenthood is the largest abortion provider in this country. They perform more than 300,000 abortions each year. Almost half of their $1 billion annual income comes from federal, state, and local government grants and contracts, our tax dollars. Planned Parenthood is not content to just have women walking through their doors. Some of the facilities are now offering so-called webcam or telemed abortions. Rather than meeting the abortionist in person, a pregnant woman will go to the Planned Parenthood facility in her area, and she will talk to an abortionist who is in an office in another city, maybe even in another state, several hundred miles away. She will talk to the abortionist and he will say, well, I think that you're ready for this. He will push a button on his computer and a drawer in the room where she is sitting will open up and there will be 2 pills in there. And he will describe them or differentiate them, probably by color, and he will tell her which one to take at that time. That drug will kill her unborn baby. And then he will say, go home, and in a day or 2, take the second pill, and that pill will expel the dead baby from her body. These chemical drugs are the 2-drug process. The first, mifepristone or RU-486, as I said, will kill that baby, and the second one is a prostaglandin that will expel the dead baby. Now, RU-486 itself is a dangerous method for pregnant women. 14 women who used that drug in the United States have died since 2000. Thousands of women have suffered complications. But if you do not think that an abortionist should be able to prescribe this chemical cocktail over the computer to someone who's sitting in another city, maybe even another state, then you're waging a war on women. In 2000, when the Food and Drug Administration approved RU-486 for use in the United States, it established a protocol that specified that RU-486 should be administered, quote, under the supervision of a qualified physician. So I'm not quite sure how an abortionist dispensing this drug to someone in another city is supervising the procedure. But so far, Planned Parenthood is doing it, and some of the states have now responded by saying if you're going to if you're going to do an abortion, you at least have to be in the same room as the woman. So that has been able to stop the telemed abortions in some states. Now, since we are in the Chicago area, I'm sure many of you have heard that just last week there was a 24-year-old woman who was killed in a she died after getting an abortion in a Planned Parenthood facility. She was taken to the hospital, and it was determined that she died from an incomplete abortion, perforated uterus, and bleeding. Planned Parenthood of Illinois, I thought was interesting. Their statement said, "We were shocked and saddened upon learning of a tragic development at a nearby hospital." She was taken from the abortion facility by ambulance to the hospital. So this happened at a nearby hospital. And then they went on to talk about how safe abortion usually is. This spring, the California State Assembly considered legislation that would allow non-physicians to perform abortions. Nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and certified nurse midwives are already allowed to prescribe chemical abortion drugs in the state. Now, the people in these positions are very important, and they do great work, but they're not doctors. So I'm not quite sure how people who think abortion should be safe would say that reducing the standard of care for those who are going to perform this procedure is somehow pro-woman or helping them. Now, we need to ask ourselves why this need to have a physician sitting in one room who can do abortions, in a surrounding region, area, states. Why are states like California saying we want non-physicians to be able to do abortions? I think that's because the abortionists in this country are dying off or retiring, and there aren't that many doctors who are willing to do the abortions, because after 40 years, abortion is still not culturally acceptable. It is still not the normal standard. We don't talk about it at our dinner tables. "Well, Susie, what did you do today?" "Oh, I ran down to Planned Parenthood and got an abortion." I mean, it's still not talked about as frequently as our opponents might wish. And they need to find ways to get abortion out there, because a lot of the medical profession are just, they're not quite right, they don't want the reputation of being a baby killer. Abortion advocates aren't content to just push abortion in our country. They, of course, are going overseas. Our tax dollars are funding abortions in other countries. It is being given to groups like International Planned Parenthood, who go into culturally pro-life countries, Africa, South America, Central America, and they push abortion. They lobby to overturn pro-life laws in these countries with our tax dollars. In 2009, President Obama restored United States funding to the United Nations Population Fund. This is the UNFPA. His first budget was $50 million. For this coming year, he's reduced it to only $39 million. Now, under President Bush and his pro-life predecessors, the United States was not funding the United Nations Population Fund. We had cut off support to them because they were involved in China's population control program, which does include forced abortion. Last summer, Vice President Joe Biden went to China and gave a speech in which he stated that he wouldn't second-guess their population control policy, that he fully understands it. Now, stories abound of pregnant women in China who are dragged out of their homes, taken to so-called family planning centers against their wishes, and they have an abortion forced on them. The abortion can be so violent that sometimes the women die along with their baby, some of them even full-term babies. Now, even the New York Times has started to publish stories about how 7th and 8th month abortions are routine in China. You may have seen the pictures of Feng Jianmei, a Chinese woman who was dragged from her home. She was 7 months pregnant. This happened in June. Dragged from her home. She was beaten, forcibly aborted. The officials then thought they would teach her a lesson because she had tried to avoid their system, and they placed the dead baby on the bed next to her so that she could see the baby. Now, her sister took a picture of her laying on the bed with the baby beside her, and that hit the internet worldwide and is starting to wake up some people about what is really happening in China. It is estimated that there are 37 million more males than females in China. 200,000 children a year, usually from poor families, are seized, kidnapped, or sold as child brides. Families are buying little girls so that their son will have a wife when he grows up. Girls from surrounding countries are kidnapped or lured under false pretenses and forced to work in brothels. And our vice president won't second guess this policy. I have to admit, when I heard that, I thought we need to introduce this man to the Wizard of Oz because he needs a brain, a backbone, and a heart. Yeah. Talking about courage, an 88-year-old woman in China is currently in the hospital dying from kidney failure. Lu Xiaoying made her living by collecting and recycling trash. 40 years ago, she was going through the trash and came across a little baby girl that had been abandoned, but the girl was still alive. So she took that girl home, and over the last 40 years, she has collected more than 30 babies that were left to die on the streets of China. 4 of them she and her husband raised. The others she put out to family and friends to take care of. The youngest one is now, I think, 7. She found him when she was 82 years old. And she said, I couldn't just leave him on the streets. Most of these are baby girls that are being left because if you can only have one child, you don't want a girl. But if the pro-woman abortion advocates see some horror with what's happening in China, they're not being very loud or very visible about it. And as I said, our tax dollars are still going toward a United Nations program that is helping support this. But we are the ones supposedly waging a war on women. The use of abortion as a means of sex selection is a major problem in a number of Asian countries, including China and India. According to various reports, more than 160 million girls are missing, having been the victim of sex selection abortions. And unfortunately, that practice of deciding to get an abortion because you don't like the sex of your child is increasing here in the United States. When gender is the reason for the abortion, a disproportionate number of the abortions are performed on baby girls. Abortion advocates who claim to be pro-woman should be horrified that freedom of choice means you can kill your baby because she is a girl. But when given the opportunity to support legislation in Congress, which we had a vote on this past May, rather than oppose sex selection abortion, they oppose the legislation. President Obama and 168 members of the House voted against the bill to say there will be no sex selections in this country. So where are the pro-woman abortion advocates in this battle? They aren't speaking up for girls who are killed because they are girls. But if you think that we should stop abortions for that reason, then somehow we're waging this war on women. Unborn babies at 20 weeks gestation can feel pain. Now, to date, 9 states have passed legislation saying that you cannot perform an abortion after roughly 20 weeks because that child can feel pain, and the state has a compelling interest to protect that unborn child. But if you think that baby should be protected because he or she can feel pain, again, somehow that is a war on women. This last Tuesday, the U.S. House of Representatives voted on a bill that would ban abortions in the nation's capital when the child can feel pain. Right now, Washington, D.C. has no law on abortion. Abortion is allowed for any reason up through 9 months of pregnancy. The Congress has the authority to enact laws in Washington, D.C., and there was a vote in the U.S. House to say abortions after 20 weeks will not be allowed because the unborn child can feel pain. But again, that went down, unfortunately. But if you think there should be any limits on abortion whatsoever, you're waging that war on women. The bottom line for abortion advocates is making sure that abortion remains legal for any reason with no limits. The unborn child must be sacrificed at all costs. And if the mothers are hurt in the process, quite frankly, I don't think our opponents care. And certainly we're all familiar with the charge that if you think churches and religious institutions should be free to exercise their religious freedom under the First Amendment, and that the government should not be able to force religion to do something to which they have a moral objection, you are waging a war on women. As you know, the Obama administration is attempting to define which religious liberties they will allow churches to exercise. Religious institutions are being told that they must pay for health insurance plans that cover medical procedures and drugs contrary to their religious beliefs and consciences. Now, I want to take a short detour here. The administration had offered what they called as a compromise. They said that the churches wouldn't have to pay for birth control. The insurance companies will have to provide it at no cost because, after all, birth control is cheaper than prenatal care and childbirth. Now, that position should send a chill down your spine. Birth control is cheaper than prenatal care and birth. So is abortion. So is the government going to mandate that insurance companies provide and pay for all abortions? A wheelchair is cheaper than a knee or hip replacement. A lethal injection is certainly cheaper than kidney dialysis or an organ transplant. Does that mean that the government can mandate insurance companies provide the wheelchair or the injection at no cost because it's cheaper? Is that how we're going to decide what care we get as human beings? More than 50 religious organizations and institutions have filed more than 20 lawsuits against this mandate from the Health and Human Services. I recently read the Erich Metaxas biography on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and it was interesting to read how the Nazi regime gradually took control of the church in Germany. Some of the churches did not want to speak out because the government provided financial security to the pastors, and they weren't all that eager to jeopardize their income. And that got me to wondering if the churches in America have to choose between violating their moral conscience and giving up that tax-exempt status. What will the decision be? I'd like to think that we know. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum Encyclopedia summarized, throughout the Nazi era, the vast majority of the Protestant church leadership did not challenge the state's discriminatory legislation and actions. The Catholic and Protestant churches protested strongly against the Nazi euthanasia program and succeeded in limiting its scope. Nonetheless, neither the Catholic leadership nor the Protestant clerical hierarchy officially protested the persecution of Jews or the horrors of the final solution. In contrast, the churches in America are speaking up. I hope they will continue to fight for religious freedom and for those who cannot speak for themselves. After the Supreme Court's June 26th decision on the Affordable Health Care Act, better known as Obamacare, the LCMS Synod President, Dr. Matthew Harrison, wrote, "The court's decision today guarantees that we will continue to bring awareness to the threat to religious liberty represented by the birth control mandate, which requires virtually all health plans, including those of religious organizations, to cover birth control drugs and products that could cause the death of the unborn. We are opposed to the birth control mandate because it runs counter to the biblical truth of the sanctity of human life and creates a conflict of conscience for religious employers and insurers who face steep penalties for non-compliance based upon their religious convictions. We will continue to stand with those who have filed suit in the many religious freedom cases pending against the birth control mandate. Through education and civic advocacy, we will continue to educate the public about the vital necessity of protecting our First Amendment right to act according to the tenets of our faith. We remain steadfast in our opposition to the birth control mandate and will continue working to ensure our right to refrain from paying for products and services that conflict with our doctrine about the sanctity of all human life." I think that's a great statement, and the churches have found or are finding their voice of courage. Last week, a federal judge in Colorado ruled in favor of a family-owned business who is challenging this HHS mandate. The judge wrote that the government's arguments, quote, "are countered and indeed outweighed by the public interest in the free exercise of religion." Now, if the judge had ruled differently and said, "We're sorry to this," I believe it was a Catholic company, the company was owned by Catholics who did not want to provide this service for their employees. They do provide insurance. But if the judge had decided, no, you have to go along with this mandate, they would have had to choose between complying with the mandate or just dropping insurance coverage for their employees altogether. If they had decided they were not going to comply with the mandate that is now going to be put on all churches and religious institutions, they would be fined $100 per employee per day of noncompliance. With 265 employees, the fine would have amounted to almost $10 million per year. If the company had decided to just drop insurance coverage, the employees would have been forced into a government-run exchange, and the company would then be fined $2,000 per employee per year for not providing the coverage, and that would have been more than $500,000 a year. So the penalties are steep. Now, I don't know if this judge's decision is going to stand, but it will certainly, I hope, give some courage to other judges around the country that religious freedom and your beliefs do need to come into play in this, when you're talking laws and legislation. Now, next January, we are going to recognize, I can't say celebrate, but we recognize the 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton. While some in this country will be celebrating what they consider to be a right for women, the rest of us will be remembering the 55 million unborn children who have lost their lives in this Holocaust, as well as their mothers. I had said earlier that proponents of abortion do not care about women, because I really don't see anything pro-woman about what they do. Prescribing a chemical cocktail to a woman in another city or in another state, not being able to help if there are complications, opposing common sense legislation about the facilities where abortions are performed, opposing informed consent regulations, giving the woman the information and giving her time to think about it. There isn't anything pro-woman about what they are doing. Now, not all women have some problems after the abortion, but many do. Physical, emotional, psychological. A leading complication of abortion is that the procedure may harm a woman's reproductive system, damaging her uterus or cervix. This leads to reproductive problems. She can't have children in the future. Or we have seen an increase in the rise of ectopic pregnancies. And in some cases, like Tanya Reeves here in Chicago, there is death that comes from abortion. Women who have had abortions report a lot of psychological and emotional complications. They have problems with their partner or their husband or their parents. It might be the parents who took her to the abortion facility. Women who have had abortions are more likely to abuse their other children. Children of aborting women have higher rates of behavior problems. Aborted women report a sense of helplessness, emotional numbing, guilt, pain, grief, depression. They have difficulty recalling the event. They might have eating disorders, higher psychiatric admissions, flashbacks, nightmares, suicidal thoughts, and in some cases, suicide. A study in Finland found that the suicide rate for women having abortions is 3 times the national average and 6 times what it was for women who gave birth. Instead of letting a woman grieve over her decision to kill her child, abortion supporters refuse to acknowledge the problem that that can result from abortion. They look at it as nothing more than an appendectomy. Well, that was taken out, so don't worry about it. Go on with your life. Increased risk of breast cancer, but our opponents refuse to even acknowledge that that might be a possible connection to the abortion. We cannot give ground accepting this as a fight of baby versus woman, because we care for both. We know that both are hurt. Where are the American people on the issue of abortion? A Gallup poll released this spring found that 50% of Americans identified themselves as pro-life, 41% identified themselves as pro-choice or pro-abortion. If you look more closely at the poll, we found that only 25% say abortion should be legal under any circumstance, which is what we have in this country today. 59% think abortion should be illegal in all circumstances or legal only in a few. Now, most abortions are sought because the woman doesn't want to be pregnant at this time in her life. Having a child will interfere with her education or her career, or she's too young or too old to have a baby, she can't afford a baby. But more than 90% of abortions in this country are performed because the baby is just coming at the wrong time. I said earlier that from our opponent's perspective, the unborn child must be sacrificed at all cost. That statement, that fact, should tell us more than anything that this is a spiritual battle. When creating the world, God said, "Let us make man in our image." Man was special. Man was different. God didn't create the trees or the fish or the stars in his image. He created man in his image. God loved his people so much that Jesus came to earth as one of us and died for us. So if God had a weakness or vulnerability, it would be for his people, especially children. And Satan knows that. From the beginning of time, he has tried to destroy God's people, the ones created in his image. Throughout history, children have been sacrificed. In the Old Testament, children were sacrificed to Moloch. Israeli baby boys were to be killed in Egypt. Herod killed all boys under 2 in an attempt to kill Jesus. Even just as recently as 200 years ago, child sacrifice to idols was being practiced in India. And today, 1.2 million unborn children are being sacrificed through abortion in America. The difference now is that we even pay to do it. It is no surprise that when a society devalues life at the beginning, it will also devalue life at the end. Food and water, or nutrition and hydration, are defined as medical treatment, and they are being routinely withheld from the elderly in hospitals and nursing homes. It is also withheld from those who are disabled but not dying, or not dying fast enough. In 1983, almost 30 years ago, bioethicist Daniel Callahan warned that many of his colleagues favored broad policies for withdrawing feeding tubes, not because of special burdens involved in such feeding, but because, quote, "A denial of nutrition may in the long run become the only effective way to make certain that a large number of biologically tenacious patients actually die." Biologically tenacious. In other words, people in a coma or a persistent vegetative state, they just won't die. We will also see wide-scale euthanasia if the president's health care plan is allowed to go into full effect. The Obamacare plan has set up an independent payment advisory board which will be able to ration life-saving medical care. They will recommend ways of limiting government Medicaid payments so they're below the rate of medical inflation. And under the Obama law, not even Congress can increase the Medicare payments that are limited by this board. So they will be able to limit, and they have already decided that at least $555 billion will be taken from Medicare over the next 10 years. Seniors won't be able to get the care that they want or need. And what's less widely known is that there's also a provision in the law that says you can't use your own money to get the health care that you want if Medicare is not going to pay for it. This Independent Payment Advisory Board is also charged with making recommendations to the Federal Department of Health and Human Services to limit how much of your own money you can use. And it's not just for senior citizens, it is for all of us. The goal is to force private health care spending below the rate of medical inflation. Federal bureaucrats can implement the recommendations administratively, the recommendations from this Independent Payment Advisory Board, so there will be no congressional oversight or review. The board will have the power to impose so-called quality and efficiency measures on hospitals, requiring the hospitals to report on how they are complying with these standards. Doctors will have to comply with the quality measures in order to be able to contract with any qualified healthcare plan. Basically, doctors, hospitals, and other healthcare providers will be told by Washington, D.C. which diagnostic tests and what medical care meets quality and efficiency standards, not just for government programs like Medicare, but for everyone. Treatment that a doctor and patient think is necessary or advisable to save that patient's life or improve the patient's health, but which goes against the government-imposed standards, will be denied, even if the patient is willing and able to pay for it. So in effect, there will be one uniform national standard of care established by Washington bureaucrats, set with a view to limiting what you are allowed to spend to save or enhance your life or that of your family. The law will go into effect mostly in the next year or two. It must be repealed. It must be dismantled. It is a direct assault on the sanctity of human life and taking care of innocent people. Now, I know that you are all busy and involved with a variety of pro-life activities. That's why you're here, because you want to learn more. I want to just give you a few suggestions. First, we went through this at the prayer breakfast. Pray for those who are active in the pro-life movement. Roe v. Wade has been with us for almost 40 years, and I know a lot of people who are getting tired. They're wondering, when is this battle ever going to end? And we need to pray for those who are active and working, including yourselves, that we would have the energy and the strength and the willingness and the courage to keep battling. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." We also pray for those who support, promote, and perform abortions. We don't judge them. We don't hate them. I do feel sorry for them because I believe they are tools being used by the devil. But Jesus Christ died for them just as much as he died for us. We would pray that they come into the light. It is estimated that 35 to 40% of all women in America have had an abortion. Many women have had 2 or more abortions. And yes, Christian women are getting abortions. A study of abortion in America by the Guttmacher Institute found that 37% of women obtaining abortions identify themselves as Protestant and 28% as Catholic. That would be 65%. Now, I'm not sure that means they are going to church or that they are practicing, but they consider themselves to be Protestant or Catholic. You probably have 1 or more women in your church who have had an abortion. She may have dealt with it, and she has sought and received that forgiveness, but she may not. You probably have men in your church who paid to kill their unborn child. You may have parents who forced their teenage daughter to get an abortion because they were ashamed. They didn't want the pastor or their fellow church members to know that their teenage daughter, their unmarried daughter, was sexually active. I have heard several women tell the story of their abortions, some before they became Christians and some after. And what I find amazing is that several of them have said, when I finally got up the courage at some church meeting or some women's conference to talk about my abortion and tell them that I had it, they're always amazed at the number of women who will come up to them afterwards saying, "I am so glad you shared your story. I had an abortion X number of years ago, and I have not been able to tell anybody. I can't talk about it." There are a lot of hurting women in this country. We need to be reaching out to them. They need to know about the love of Jesus and that forgiveness is theirs. All they have to do is ask. I think many pastors are afraid to talk about the issue from the pulpit because they don't want to hurt the women. They're thinking, if someone out there has had an abortion, if someone has paid for an abortion, I don't want to offend them, I don't want to hurt them. But the people in the pews need to know that there is forgiveness and there is love. Hopefully the young people in your church know that premarital sex is wrong, but they also need to know that if they find themselves in that situation, expecting a child, they're pregnant, they need to know that they can come to you, to the pastor, to the church, to the youth leader, to get some help and some guidance and work through this. We don't want them to be embarrassed and go make a decision that they will have to live with for the rest of their lives. Do the people in your church know that abortion is wrong, or do you just assume that they do? Oh, everybody in my church is good. Get some pro-life brochures, and if you haven't, put them in the back so that they can pick something up and they realize that this is an issue that they need to be concerned about. I spoke at a meeting a couple of months ago, and afterwards one gentleman, active in his LCMS church, came up to me and said that when it came to abortion, he had always lived by the Joshua rule. As for me and my family, we will not get an abortion. But when it came to others, he was not going to tell them what they should or shouldn't do. That was up to them. And he said, I was glad to hear this, that I was making him rethink his position. Many pro-life people do think that way. I'm not going to tell others what to do. I wouldn't get an abortion, I won't let my daughter get an abortion, but I'm not going to get involved in someone else's private decision. That's where the need for courage comes in. Maybe this gentleman will find a way to speak up and to speak out and to make a difference in someone's life that he hadn't thought of before. While the pro-abortion movement offers only a dead baby as the solution for a woman facing a problem pregnancy, the pro-life movement has taken up the challenge. And I know many of you work with the pregnancy resource centers, providing the services and the help and the medical care, and even maybe a place to stay if she needs that. I believe those who work with the pregnancy resource centers are fulfilling the words of Jesus in Matthew 25. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." Now, I know the pro-life movement cares about women, but the people who are working at the pregnancy resource centers are doing the direct day-to-day intervention and support and work for those women, and I just give them so much credit. I'll talk briefly about something that's scary for most Christians: politics. We need to get involved in elections. Make available to your church members information of where candidates stand on issues that are important to the church. Encourage pro-lifers to get involved in politics. William Wilberforce was a member of the British Parliament when he became a Christian. He was going to give up his seat in Parliament because he thought that politics and religion don't mix. He didn't think that being a politician was a good vocation for a Christian. Now, fortunately, his friends prevailed upon him to stay where he was. And he is given almost single-handed credit for first abolishing the slave trade in England and then abolishing slavery there altogether. You may know the next William Wilberforce. We do need men and women in office voting to make sure that our laws reflect our values. Now, Pediatrics, the Journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics, published a study on the experience of families with children with trisomy 13 and 18. Many of them were told their child was incompatible with life. 50% said were told that the child would be a vegetable. 57% were told that their child would live with a life of suffering. Now, unfortunately, only about 1/5 of these children actually lived to about the age of 5. But I think to the surprise of the researchers, 97% of the parents described their child as a happy child. The families reported that the children enriched their family. But half of the families also said that taking care of a disabled child was more challenging, more difficult than they had expected. I would encourage you, if you have a family in your community, if you know of someone who has a child with special needs, or maybe they're taking care of an elderly parent, offer them some help. Offer to stay with that child or the parent even for 1 hour so they can go for a walk, go get a cup of coffee, or maybe run to the grocery store. Some people have made difficult decisions in deciding to give a child with disabilities life and to take care of that life. It would be, I think, very pro-life of us, very Christian of us to help in any way that we can. As citizens in two kingdoms, we take to heart the verses in Ephesians that Dr. Lamb addressed so well last night. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. And of course, since we are in Illinois, the land of Lincoln, his second inaugural address: with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. If you ever get nervous or your courage starts to waver a bit, think of the unborn baby who needs your voice. Some woman who hears you may be considering abortion at that moment. Think of the elderly grandma in the nursing home who is the potential victim of starvation and dehydration. Think of the helpless disabled person who is soon to be a target of assisted suicide. You are not speaking for yourself. You are speaking for them. Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Thank you.